The good and bad of the drive to electrification, drug smuggling and the worrying trend of crew criminalization, and security threats to major sea lanes. All these stories and much more on the latest episode of Maritime in Minutes. Hi, it's Marcus Hand, editor of Seatrade Maritime News here, with our June news roundup, Maritime in Minutes, and I'm joined as usual by our correspondent, Gary Howard. We'll be discussing the shipping news stories that stood out for us over the last month. Between casualties, war and security risks, and seafarer criminalization, it has been a busy few weeks, and that's just a taste of my own picks. So as always, Gary, why don't you get straight into it?
Thanks, Marcus, and hi everyone. I'll kick off with some positive electric news before Marcus's first pick. There was a deal between Ocean Network Express and Hamburg Port Authority. It served as a reminder of the sort of looming requirements for shore power for major European ports from 2030. Ocean Network Express signed its first shore power deal in Europe with Hamburg, becoming the first shipping company to sign up for cold ironing provisions at the port's CTA and CTB terminals, where installation and testing are underway at the moment. Hamburg CTH and CTT both have shore power connections in place as well, and the port has pledged to have the facility for all of its box terminals by the end of this year. Ocean Network Express have been involved in those integration tests at CTA and CTB, so the agreement is a natural step forward. The first integration test actually at CTA was carried out with an MSC ship in May, so Ocean Network Express are not alone in preparing for the zero emissions at berth regulations under Fuel EU Maritime. Great news for the environment and for anyone living near Hamburg who breathes. Fingers crossed that there is a will to make sure that the use of these facilities happens before they're just mandated by regulations at the end of the decade. Marcus, I hope you don't have any examples of electrification leading to large amounts of emissions.
Well, I do, although I guess they were quite far away from people. Obviously, the flip side of electrification is the fire risk of battery fires, and I'm sort of spoilers here, but I'm going to bookend this episode with fiery casualties, both of which were ongoing stories for much of the month. The first week of June saw another vehicle carrier fire in the shape of the Zodiac maritime vessel Morning Midas. The Morning Midas was sailing in the North Pacific on the 3rd of June when a fire started in one of the vehicle decks. The crew attempted to bring the fire under control but weren't able to do so. A distress call was sent out and the crew evacuated into a lifeboat and were brought safely on board a nearby vessel, the Cosco Hellas. The fire again brings into focus the question of fire safety on board ships carrying electric vehicles. The Morning Midas had a cargo of around 3,000 vehicles. These included 800 fully electric or hybrid. An initial statement from Zodiac Maritime indicated that the fire started on the deck containing EVs. The fire on the vessel continued to burn as it took a week for the salvage crews to reach the Morning Midas, which was actually hundreds of miles from a remote Alaskan island chain in the middle of the North Pacific. By the time the salvors turned up, it turned out all they could really do was watch as the fire continued to consume the Morning Midas, and it eventually sank on the 23rd of June. Casualties such as these are becoming a real concern to insurers. Not surprising when the value of the cargo lost has been estimated at $550 million. There is also the danger to the crew, although fortunately in this case everyone was evacuated safely. This has sadly not been the case in some other incidents. Tackling EV fires requires a different approach to traditional techniques for firefighting, and the urgency of finding a way to successfully fight such blazes will only grow as EVs gain in popularity.
Yeah, I know there are a few technologies and schemes out there to try and identify ways of dealing with these before they get massively out of hand, right? By detecting heat early or detecting some of the gases that come out of the batteries when they start misbehaving.
Yeah, I think it's still in its fairly early stages though.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying the Seatrade Maritime podcast, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on the app of your choice.
Shall I take us into week 2?
Indeed, let's do that.
So from my side, some interesting stats from Intercargo in June, this time on bulker safety. The association analysed its figures on casualties from the 10 years to 2024, with some positives on the top line numbers. Casualty numbers for bulkers have been falling since 2011, despite obviously a growing fleet over that same time. And the rolling 10-year average of dry bulk vessels lost per year has fallen from 11 in 1994 to 2003 to just 2 in the latest data, which ranges from 2015 to 2024. The number of deaths on bulkers has fallen markedly since 2020, according to the same data, and there were 0 deaths reported in 2020, 2021, 2023, and 2024. The leading cause of death on bulkers will be familiar to a lot of listeners. It was cargo liquefaction, noted in 55 of the 89 deaths covered in the report, followed by structural issues at 22 and 12 caused by cargo shift. While there has been a reduction in the number of deaths since 2020, the rolling 10-year average obviously goes beyond that and currently stands at 4.45, and that compares to a low of 3.41 deaths per year in the years 2012 to 2021. Not included within that data, and an issue raised quite strongly by Intercargo in their release and analysis, were 3 bulker casualties caused by attacks in the Red Sea. Each led to a total loss that, caused by missile strikes and unmanned air vehicles and surface vessels, and the deaths of 4 seafarers as a result of those attacks. So there's plenty there for dry bulk operators to think about within the data, but one easy takeaway is to submit accident investigation reports early and ensure that flag states are submitting those onto the IMO's data collection system. The average reporting time remains around 2 years, says Intercargo, so don't be too surprised if when we look back next year, if the data looks a little bit different, when we're looking back from 10 years into the past from 2026.
An average reporting time of 2 years. I mean, that's really long when you think that's an average, because that says that some must be 4, 5 years?
Yeah, I know just looking at the reports that come out of the UK and the US, there's some really detailed reports that come out, especially for complex incidents. They take a lot of time in bringing together all the facts around those, right?
No, that is true, yeah, when you do see those that come out, but I'm probably thinking more of probably some of the smaller flag states in this case. Anyway, I'm going to move on to a topic which we've covered on a number of occasions, and that is the criminalisation of seafarers, and it's something that's not going away, and indeed, worryingly, it appears to be getting worse. The rise in criminalisation is concerning both in the typical cases we've seen down the years where senior officers are arrested following casualties and face charges in jail, often related to pollution incidents, and more recently where the vessel they are in command of is found to have drugs on board, and senior crew are arrested even though there is no evidence linking them to the drugs. We have been following a couple of both types of cases. The master of the Express Pearl, who has not been allowed to leave Sri Lanka for over 4 years since the casualty, and the captain and the chief mate of the Phoenician M, jailed for 30 years in Turkey over drugs found on board the bulker in 2023. Seatrade Maritime News correspondent Nick Savides covered a high-level conference at the LMO, highlighting the criminalisation of crew and drug smuggling-related cases were particularly in the spotlight. ITF General Secretary Stephen Cotton told Seatrade Maritime News, "We need to make the authorities, whether it's law enforcement at the port or the judiciary, understand the tangible impossibility for some of the seafarers to be anywhere near engaged with drug smuggling." I think this is part of a lack of comprehension of just the sheer size of ships and how hard it would be to know that the drugs, somewhere deep in a hold, for example. And in terms of the data side of this, P&I clubs, schools said that cases involving cocaine smuggling had increased 600% between 2013 and 2023. And the pandemic could actually have had its part to play in this. Schools' Ruby Hassan, VP Global Head of Claims and Transformation, told the conference, "It's as if drug smugglers realized during COVID you can smuggle far more narcotics on ships than by air. Worth noting, during that time there were hardly any flights, so they would have been looking for an alternative route to smuggle drugs by." Gary.
Yeah, take us into the third week. Looking over at the US, container imports at the port of LA this May were down 9% on May 2024. They were down 19% on April 2025, so the preceding month, and fully 25% down on the port's own projections pre-tariffs. The overall figures for May were the worst for 2 years, the port said during a briefing, which is available on YouTube. On-off tariffs were the obvious suspects for a dip in imports during the month of May, which is usually stronger than April, according to the Port of LA. Of course, container markets have been sort of a mess of early imports in anticipation of the tariffs, ships repositioning as alliances change, looking to reposition ships due to, the USTR's various fees on Chinese ships, ultimately not knowing whether your shipment will attract more than double its value in tariffs upon landing in the US was probably a disincentive to trade into the US from China. An economist warned during that Port of LA briefing that tariffs and the resulting lower imports into the US might bring extra inflationary pressure of around 1.5% on consumer goods. For takeaways from that discussion and a link to the full briefing, check out Barry Parker's story, Port of LA Volumes Impacted by On-Off Tariffs, which will be linked in the show notes. Barry did note in his story that the briefing took place less than a day after hostilities between Israel and Iran broke out. Marcus.
Yes, just in case shipping markets weren't complicated enough. I think it's fair to say we couldn't fail to cover the impact of the conflict between Israel and Iran that erupted in June, a day after that briefing you just mentioned. Shipping has faced plenty of security concerns in recent times, and this conflict added another with the potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran threatened to close the key waterway, a move that was approved by its parliament. Such a move would impact across a broad range of shipping markets, but would be particularly serious for large tankers, with 20% of global oil and gas supplies moving through the strait. That means there are also some 200 to 300 VLCC voyages per month, according to Maritime Strategies International, as well as many other types of tankers as well. Our US correspondent, Barry Parker again, reported on the thoughts of top tanker owners from Frontline and DHT Holdings, of their views on what might happen if the strait was closed. DHT chief Svein Moxon Hartfeld saw a scramble to replace volumes coming out of the region, while Frontline's Lars Barstad said he seriously doubted the strait would be closed for a long period of time. As it turned out, there was a US and Qatar brokered ceasefire after 12 days of the conflict, which appears to be holding, and the strait has remained open to shipping traffic. While the strait did not close, it highlighted the fragility of major sea lines to geopolitical conflicts. It also raised the concern of shipping of how it's been caught in asymmetric warfare, with the reports of widespread electronic interference and GPS jamming in the waterways causing safety and environmental fears.
It's difficult, right? I think we live in a time where it's hard to say, oh, don't worry, that won't happen, because we've said about so many things that then immediately did happen straight after that.
Yeah, it's got increasingly hard to predict what is going to happen next.
Yeah, and Iran has obviously seen firsthand how effective controlling a major sea lane can be in getting the attention of the world leaders. I'll take us into the final week of June, though, with a sort of sad story. Guard's annual crew claims report has more worrying data on crew deaths. Suicide accounting for 9% of seafarer deaths at sea last year, an improvement on the 11% in the prior report, but still more than the number of deaths caused by injuries. A few concerning points that I picked out from Marcus's story were most suicides involved officers, both junior and senior ranks. Suicides were more likely in the first 3 months of contracts, and none had attracted negative attention related to their work or sought any kind of psychological help. There is the added worry that deaths by suicide may be underreported. Guard said this last year, and this year they've noted that they've taken a conservative approach to attributing deaths in situations where a seafarer died due to drowning, as it's obviously very difficult to tell whether a seafarer going overboard was deliberate or accidental. Illness remains the leading cause of seafarer death on board, accounting for 83% of deaths, and almost 60% of those were due to heart disease. The heightened risk of cardiovascular illness among seafarers due to factors we're probably all familiar with, such as stress, poor nutrition, and limited physical activity on board ships. Hopefully these data are heard by ship owners and managers out there and can be used to try and improve conditions on board to protect the physical and mental well-being of seafarers, as it seems to me well within their power to change or influence seafarer stress, nutrition, and activity levels.
Yeah, I think there definitely are positive things that managers and owners can do to influence the working environment of their seafarers. And I think that's the value of these reports, because I think it does give that data to push the reasons for these things to be, money to be spent on them and so forth. And you certainly are seeing it from the top companies. I'm not sure how well it filters down into the rest of the industry, though.
Yeah, I dare say we'll hear a lot about these sort of things at Crew Connect Global, these initiatives to make life better for seafarers on board. And I think it is not all just, a soft humanitarian approach to things. I think there's a commercial approach to this as well. In a crewing crisis, you want to look after the health and well-being of your seafarers so that they stay within the job and stay healthy, right?
No, indeed. It makes sense that you want healthy and happy seafarers who stay in their jobs and do their job well as well. Now, as promised at the start of this episode, I'm going to be returning to ships on fire at sea for my final pick of the month. And in this case, it was the Wanhai 503. Now, the Wanhai 503 suffered a cargo explosion in one of its holds off the coast of Kerala in India on 9th June. This sadly resulted in the loss of the lives of 4 crew members, 2 of whose bodies remain missing. The other 18 crew were evacuated as fire spread through much of the vessel. Now, there are many issues around this particular story, which Nick Savides and myself delve into in an article entitled Wanhai 503, The Burning Questions. See the link in the show notes if you want to read more of this. But one thing I would like to focus on here is how this casualty has actually been handled. At the time of recording, fires still smoulder in some of the burnt-out vessel's cargo holds, as it is being towed away from India's coast with the aim of getting it outside of the country's EEZ. And it's understood to be about halfway there now. This all brings up the question of the long-standing problem of ports or places of refuge for ships in distress. It's understood the Indian authorities were keen to avoid a repeat of the Express Pearl casualty off Sri Lanka in 2021. In that case, the vessel sank after a lengthy cargo fire, leading to pollution along coastal communities. But rather than learning from this incident, where the Express Pearl was denied a port of refuge to fight the fire, the Indian authorities have done exactly the same thing. Salvors have been forced to tackle the blaze on the vessel while trying to tow it away from the coast in heavy seas caused by monsoon conditions. This greatly increases the risk both to the salvors boarding the vessel and the chances of the vessel breaking up. Somewhat surprisingly, the vessel hasn't actually broken up, although the Wanhai 503 is described as being in a structurally compromised but stable state. Assuming it stays afloat, the plan is to tow it some 1,000 or so kilometers to a port of refuge in Sri Lanka. That is pending the authorities' approval in Sri Lanka. Why Sri Lanka should risk this is far from clear, given India refused a port of refuge even though it benefited from the trade which the Wanhai 503 brought, which was sailing between China and India. The owner should be on trying to save vessels in distress, not forcing them out to sea in the hope that they become someone else's problem. And on that note, that is all we have time for on this episode. If you want to learn more about the stories featured in this episode, the links are in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to joining you on the next episode of the Seatrade Maritime Podcast.